Okay. Who's showing the con?
One of the boats.
Yeah, okay. All right. Just waiting for a couple more people to join. I can see them coming through now. Good time.
All three boats, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Ponant Sydney Noumea Yacht Race 2025 race briefing. I'm Commodore Sam Haynes, and with me here is also Tara Blank Ramos, sailing manager. And then online we have competitors, Hemi Menina from AMSA, Shane Kennedy from the BOM, and Lee Goddard, our race committee chair. I just want to thank you for competing. It's a small fleet, but we appreciate your competition. And as far as the race briefing is concerned, we'll just try to keep this as brief as possible and to the point. So the first on the agenda here is to have our AMSA briefing. So over to you, Hemming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hemi Menina. I'm a Senior Search and Rescue Mission Coordinator with Australia's Joint Rescue Coordination Centre. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you as you prepare for the 2025 Sydney to Noumea Yacht Race. This briefing is focused on ensuring your crew understands what to expect during a search and rescue incident, how to prepare your vessel and personnel for emergencies at sea, and how best to work with us at JRCC Australia. The emphasis here is on clear procedures, sound judgment, and effective use of the emergency equipment. So to begin with, every vessel in this race is required to carry a registered EPIRB. It's not enough to simply have it on board. You need to know how and when to use it. Particularly if you're forced to activate the beacon, it should be attached to a person, a life raft, or the vessel, so long as the vessel is still afloat. If you're inside a life raft and sea conditions are rough, our recommendation is to keep the EPIRB inside the raft, but upright and vertical so that the aerial remains clear. While some EPIRBs are equipped with a water activation feature, this should not be relied upon, and every competitor must be confident in manually activating their beacon. For personal safety, personal locator beacons, or PLBs, are highly recommended. These are intended for individual use. PLBs should be worn on the upper body, ideally on a life jacket, with the aerial facing vertically when activated. You'll need to make sure the lanyard is securely attached so the beacon stays with you if you're lost overboard. And if it isn't secured, it becomes useless the moment it's lost in the sea. Once an EPIRB or PLB is activated, it begins transmitting a distress signal to a satellite system called the COSPAS SARSAT system. This signal is relayed directly to the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre, and the beacon itself will emit an audible tone, and either a strobe light or LED light will assist with visual detection. So once we receive the signal, we check the registration details, confirm the vessel or person in distress, and then begin coordination of the appropriate response. Now, depending on your location during the race, we may liaise with the Maritime Rescue Coordination Centre in Noumea or the Rescue Coordination Centre New Zealand. So the accuracy and currency of your registration details are essential. They allow us to act quickly, contact the relevant people, and understand what assets may be required for your situation. Australia's search and rescue region spans over 53 million square kilometres. It includes large areas of the Indian Ocean, the Southern Ocean, the Pacific. Given the race route, it's likely that search and rescue responsibilities may transition between jurisdictions, so you will need to know who to contact if you cannot contact race control. So this next slide has the best contact numbers for JRCC Australia, for MRCC Noumea, and also for RCC New Zealand. So please store these numbers where they're easily accessible and make sure your comms equipment is ready and operational. When we coordinate a rescue, we assess the situation and determine what resources are appropriate. These could include fixed-wing aircraft such as AMSA's Challenger or Defence's P-8 Poseidon, rotary wing helicopters from contracted providers or Defence. This depends on your proximity to land or nearby commercial or volunteer vessels. Now, response times vary significantly depending, as I said, on your distance from land, the availability of the assets, and the sea and weather conditions. So until we arrive, you are your own first responder, and that's why self-help is critical. If you accidentally activate a beacon, please inform us immediately. Every activation is treated seriously until we can confirm otherwise. You are recommended to stay with your yacht or your life raft unless we direct you to leave. A vessel or raft is significantly easier to locate than a person in the water. We recommend you designate one crew member to manage the EPIRB. Their responsibility is to ensure it stays activated and functioning until instructed to turn it off. Use visual signals such as flares or mirrors to assist with visibility. And if you have multiple beacons available on board your vessel, activate them all. Multiple signals improve detection speed and the location accuracy, and it confirms to us that your situation is in fact a real emergency. Now, if a helicopter winch rescue is required, several steps should be followed to ensure the safety of everyone involved. Listen out on VHF channel 16 and follow all of the instructions provided to you. You should turn your volume all the way up and remain attentive to the speakerphone. You should secure all loose equipment and remove or tightly frap all of your sails. You should expect strong rotor wash, intense noise, and heavy spray during the transfer. And if your engine is operable, you should start it and steer it into the wind to stabilize your vessel. If it is not operable, deploy a sea anchor from the bow and ensure your radar is on standby, and please do not use HF radio while the helicopter is operating nearby. You should be prepared to launch your life raft if you are directed to do so, and these procedures are necessary to protect both your crew and the helicopter crew. For medical emergencies, the correct process is to first contact the race committee. They will provide initial advice and determine whether to escalate the situation. If the injury or illness is serious, such as major trauma or uncontrolled bleeding, the race committee will liaise directly with JRCC Australia. And if the situation is particularly urgent or serious, you may also contact us directly, or 000 using your satellite phone or mobile phone if you're within range of land. And then once we have your contact, we'll determine whether to deploy a helicopter for evacuation if you're within range, or a fixed-wing aircraft which can drop medical supplies to you. Before you depart Noumea for the return journey as well, please take the time to update your EPIRB registration and review your emergency contact details. After any race, it's common for crews to change, schedules to shift, and plans to evolve. So if we receive a beacon activation during the return voyage, we rely on current information to launch a response. So please update your details. It only takes minutes, but will save hours during a real emergency. So in closing, JRCC's Australia's mission is to save lives at sea. We do that by working in close coordination with the race organisers, our partner rescue centres in Noumea and New Zealand, and you yourselves, the mariners who rely on our support. So preparation, training and attention to detail reduce the risk of an incident and improve survivability when one occurs. So please know your equipment, follow your procedures, and contact us early if something goes wrong. We wish you all a safe and successful race. Thank you.
Thank you, Hemi. The next person I'd like to introduce is Shane Kennedy from BOM to brief us on the weather, please.
Thank you. Good evening, all. Sharing my screen now. Okay, we'll launch into it. So expecting on Saturday that largely be sitting under this ridge of high pressure. So fairly light winds for the first couple of days is the expectation as this high steadily tracks east. The other feature to note is expecting a bit of a small trough to be out in the Coral Sea, and this should move southeast into the northern Tasman Sea over the following couple of days, and likely to enhance some winds and some weather in its vicinity. So the first couple of days will most likely be too far to the northeast to really have an impact, but we may see some of the edge effects of that towards the middle of the race, which we'll go into shortly. And then later in the period, particularly Tuesday and Wednesday next week, this trough may drift a bit further south and then deepen, but again, that should be too far south to have a direct impact, but we could still see some increasing in some weather in the second half of the race. All right, so broadly speaking, yes, a fairly light south to southeasterly winds are expected on race day, turning more east to southeasterly later on that Saturday. And then as we start to move and approach that trough, mostly east southeasterly winds are expected. I'll show you shortly that there is a bit of a smaller area of some fresh to strong winds potentially as you get closer to that trough, but expecting the worst of that should stay far enough away. And they're quite light winds crossing the north part of that trough during the Monday. And then behind that system, mostly in that southwest to northwesterly regime, swinging around more properly to the southwest in the middle of next week. The other features of note, so even though the winds are fairly light, we are expecting quite a long period southerly swell during the weekend, and quite likely we'll have a hazardous surf warning for the coastal waters during Saturday and then into Sunday. That should steadily ease later on the Sunday or starting on Monday morning and continue to ease for the rest of the race. And with a similar story, expecting a pretty benign start, so just isolated very light showers for the first couple of days with that rainfall focus more around that trough. Again, it should be well to the northeast. But it does look like it will be a fair bit wetter on Tuesday and Wednesday at this stage. I'll go through that shortly, and we could potentially see some thunderstorms as well. All right, so then zooming into the specifics here. So as mentioned, expecting very light winds to start with. So in the harbour, most likely below 10 knots, south to southwesterlies, and then swinging around more to the south-southeast out of the harbour. And for the rest of the day, and yeah, unlikely to see much more than a passing light shower. Moving into Saturday afternoon, so similar fairly light winds, so struggling to get up to 10 knots at this stage, but likely feeling the impacts of that significant long period. So around that 15 to 16 second southerly swell, and pushing up to around 3 metres at times during Saturday and Sunday. Later in the day and further north, slightly increase the chances of showers, but again, they should be fairly light and patchy. So as we move into Saturday evening, this winds more a bit east-southeasterly, but still in that 15 to 10 knot range, and still waves getting up around that 3 metres, just largely or entirely due to that significant long period southerly swell. Moving into early Sunday morning here and then zooming out a little bit more so you can see the impact of this trough in the southern Coral Sea there, would be the main focus. So again, most of its impact should be fairly closely confined to the trough itself, so shouldn't have much impact for much of Sunday. Otherwise, you're still expecting that long period southerly swell to continue. And otherwise, just there's a low chance of seeing some light showers. Similar story through the rest of Sunday. Moving into Sunday afternoon is where we see the peak of those winds. There may be some periods of 20 to 25 knots near the trough, but yeah, most likely will be more in that 10 to 15 knot range at this stage. Again, it should be far enough to the northeast to not cause any issues, but just be something to be mindful of. And similar story on the Sunday evening, but at this stage, potentially starting to move more into the 15 to 20 knot range of those winds and those east to southeasterlies, and that swell persisting. So then just having a look now, Monday, this is just a model comparison. So the European model on the top left, the Australian on the top right, US model on the bottom left, and the Japanese on the bottom right. And this is just to show, it's mostly showing winds with the same color scheme as before. So this deeper yellow-orange is the 15-knot threshold, and the green is 20 knots or above. And the black lines here are the sea level pressure. So this is just to broadly show that reasonable consensus there'll be a weak trough sitting out in the Southern Coral Sea or Northern Tasman Sea at this stage, where there's slightly fresher winds to the west of the trough system and then very light to the east of that trough system. So that'll be the main dominant feature. I'm just showing here in a zoomed out region. So crossing the northern part of that trough, there'll likely be that period of fresher winds, mainly in that 15 to 20 knot range. But then once you cross over the trough, you expect fairly light winds at this stage, light northerlies. And we should also start to see that long period swell start to ease, so dropping down more to the 2 metre range on Monday, and that period's slowly getting a bit shorter as well. And still fairly dry at the moment. Into Monday evening now, so that trough starts to get pulled further south, so expecting the winds will be fairly light. And overall, and that swell continuing to drop. We may start to see that rainfall start to pick up potentially. I'll show you that more on the next slide here, but we may start to see some showers overnight Monday, and more likely on Tuesday morning. Okay, so just looking at the model comparison once again. So that trough is expected to get pulled further south, so well to the south, and shouldn't impact you directly anymore, but it may deepen into more of a low pressure system, as shown with some of these models here. And that will do two things. It will expect it to start to enhance some northwesterly winds in the second half of the race. But there'll also be an area of increased rainfall where we have some of these northwesterly winds smashing into some northeasterly winds ahead of it. So even though the actual trough should be well to the south, it's still likely to create an area of enhanced rainfall. Unfortunately, right in the path here. So this is showing 24-hour rainfall during Tuesday. And this color scheme is 20 millimeters is the threshold for the yellow here, and anything red or above is 50 millimeters or more. So quite likely to move through an area of showers during that Tuesday as those winds are pulled into that trough and developing low well to the south. So unfortunately, pretty good model consistency, but there will be some period of showers coming through in waves, and also the potential to see some thunderstorms in the mix. The air looks fairly unstable there, so I expect there'll be some thunderstorms as well during that Tuesday period. So just zooming in on the winds, so again, expecting those sort of enhanced northwesterly winds, but still most likely not getting too much above the 15 knots is the expectation. That southerly swell should have dropped right away, down to around 1 to 1.5 meters by this point, but likely be cloudy, high chance of showers, and that potential to see some thunderstorms too, which could produce some rainfall at least in that 20 to 50 millimeter range, and possibly even sort of 50 plus. So it could be nudging heavy rainfall. And if they're close enough, of course, that's where you may get those gusty and erratic winds. So similar story late on the Tuesday, winds turning a bit more westerly, but otherwise mostly in that 15 to 20 knot range, easing overnight, with that chance of wet weather likely to continue all through Tuesday. And on Wednesday, that system, low pressure system, will continue moving south, but will have a similar influence. Still some fresh winds and enhanced rainfall as well in the vicinity, and looks like fairly decent consistency there. And this is just looking at the 24-hour rainfall on Wednesday, so again, looks like a fairly wet approach. And similar rainfall totals, so high chance of showers and that potential to see some thunderstorms as well, with about a 10% chance of seeing 50 millimeters or more. And it's mainly this European model is the most keen. Some of the other models have it a lot patchier or even starting to ease during Wednesday. So Tuesday is probably the high confidence in it being wet. And finally, just looking ahead, so otherwise, mainly expecting the winds to swing around more to the southwest and ease a little bit. And the swell becoming smaller and smaller, but otherwise, you're expecting it to be fairly wet conditions and continuing for the rest of Wednesday. And just a quick look ahead on Thursday. So mainly expecting southwesterly winds. And that rainfall should really be easing off by Thursday. Good consistency there. If so, either starting on later on Wednesday, but yeah, by Thursday should be much lighter rainfall in general. And in case it's needed to for Friday, winds mainly swinging around more to the southwest and starting to increase towards the end of next week. And lastly, just a quick look at the currents. So the East Australia current, so the separation point, it looks to be well south of Sydney and peaking at around about that 2.5 knot range or so, mostly just due east of Sydney. It gets a little bit lighter, or a little bit weaker, sorry, a bit further north, but likely still be moving into that around that 1.5 or so knot range. And otherwise, yeah, not much current of note. And sea surface temperatures generally around 20 degrees for the first section of the race, but otherwise expecting it'll be typically in the low 20s, so 22 or so for the rest of the race. And I think the very last point is just we've had some fairly high tides overnight for the past day or so, but by the weekend they should be on an easing trend and expecting that high tide of around 1.3 metres just before race start. That's enough for me. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions we're going to?
Yeah, they can type them.
Oh, they can type them. Okay. Thanks a lot, Shane. Not seeing any questions, so appreciate your briefing there, and we will now move on to Lee Goddard, Race Committee Chair. Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, Conor. Thanks, Sam, and welcome again to the Ponant Sydney to Noumea Yacht Race 2025. This, of course, is the official and compulsory race briefing. Yeah, as introduced, Lee Goddard, Chair of the committee, with David Kellett, Noel Cornish, and Mark Pavillard. Obviously, I'm working closely with Race Control, as we mentioned before. The PRO, obviously the race start officer. Tara, of course, will be in Noumea from Sunday, and more generally the sailing office. As I said, this briefing is compulsory, and also as is the weather brief on Saturday 8:30 ahead of race start. Race is on, and we've just seen the conditions, and we've just had a very good brief from AMSA, and notwithstanding the reduced number of competitors. And I do want to acknowledge, obviously, the Commodore, who I report to directly as a race committee chair, and CYCA, obviously our finishing partners in EMEA. AMSA, thanks, Hemi, BOM, thanks, Shane, and of course, a whole lot of other key stakeholders, including French authorities, the media, but most importantly, you, the competitors. Just want to you may have already received, if you haven't seen it, an email from Tara earlier today. Talks about us as a CYC hosting the 1,064 nautical mile Ponant Noumea race. 3 yachts in the race. Race starts at 1300 on Saturday the 31st, this Saturday. And at this stage, we're estimating the passage across the 3 yachts will take 3 to 7 days. Also, Tara has included in that email a list of entries with boat contacts and satellite phones, the boat photo booklet, confidential, so the contact list that you may need to, and of course the sailing instructions. So no excuses in terms of not actually receiving the documentation. They're all with you. And I just want to remind you that as a committee, our role is to maximise the participation and ensure the race is safe, it's fair, and it's as fast as practical. Just of note, you probably will be well aware that the CYCA, through the Commodore, directed a review of the Sydney Hobart of 2024, noting there's some tragic circumstances. So there are some lessons learned that's already been preliminary before that report's formally accepted and released. But we have actually incorporated those. We're not being static. We actually are a learning organisation as we move forward. Mind you that the race committee and all the race management team are volunteers. We're experienced. We're engaging, and we are actually independent. We have, of course, numerous ocean races and both offshore and otherwise between us, including spending a lot of time in the Coral Sea. And we do have significant search and rescue experience. However, of course, the experts are AMSA, and we will work with them when and if required. And of course, we've got a broad range of backgrounds. We're risk aware, but we're not risk adverse. It's the nature of sailing. There actually are risks, and we need to accept those, even in the most benign conditions versus those predicted, more challenging conditions. And of course, while our starting point is to be fair and use our discretion at times, we are black and white in terms of expectations regarding race discipline to make sure the race is managed correctly. And of course, you who participate do so with the very clear directions as per the notice of race, the sailing instructions, and of course, our sailing rules. We do have contingency plans for the full range of emergencies, and we test for and assume the worst conditions, not least the weather, communications, and serious isolated incidents. And of course, it is a long passage away from land-based assistance. And of course, we've learned from the precedents, as I mentioned, and we do adapt to these changing regulations. I want to just thank as well the participants in your cooperation in terms of regulatory compliance. It is important that we get that right. Mind you, reporting at the start, I'll work with the PRO. In this case, there's not a big fleet, but obviously make sure that you approach the committee vessel, normal VHF, and then considerations while manoeuvring. There may be some interest start boats media at the start, as you expect, but there'll be a non-interference way, and of course there may be some movements between boats if required. I just want to emphasise again, and I'll come back to it, the discipline of the SCED. We are now in a different regime in terms of, we've moved on from previous, traditional SCEDs to our satellite. And of course, position reports, the timings are very clear, and how we communicate with you about actually receiving those. And of course, if you have a problem reporting a SCED, you must make every effort by satellite phone or potentially even through another vessel, to call race control or call myself or as appropriate. We will be the race committee available throughout the duration of the race on the mobile numbers provided, including the mobile numbers provided for the SCEDs. And of course, you must at all times keep proper listening watch, including on VHF, even though it's local, and even though you may be in the middle of the ocean with not much around you, but you still have that obligations. And of course, you have obligations to report certain wind strengths and wave heights as per the directions. You must have the correct but minimum requirements for safety numbers at all times. It is different, of course, in Hobart. People aren't going to be jumping off along the coast for a whole lot of reasons. But I remind you of that requirement. And of course, if in this case, after starting, there's any crew changes, they must be advised and also before the race by the sailing office. And of course, please note the advice on potential hazards navigation. It's a long track, 1,064 nautical miles. And again, this is probably more close to race start. If you do decide to discontinue racing, offload crew, restart, you still need a minimum number of crew and safety qualifications. Declarations must be made in the cases outlined in the sailing instructions and within the time limit for lodging a protest if you're going to go down the path. And please ensure that you receive a receipt. Said if you do retire, please continue to participate in the SCEDs and advise when important where you're going. And please ensure you're knowledgeable in all functionalities of your personal equipment as briefed by our HEMI. And test service your equipment regularly, even when you're at sea. And of course, different PLBs may communicate and activate differently, successful or not. And all personal equipment should be tested and serviced at regular intervals, of course, leading up to the race of expectations and then as required during the race. And please check your PFDs, make sure your personal devices are correct. And of course, we've got new processes in terms of actually individual AIS and other expectations for members, for individual participants. Inadvertent trigger of EPIRDs and PLBs. Obviously, HEMI, and AMSA, remind us that this is very inconvenient. So please ensure you maintain and take good care of all your personal equipment and report any accidental activation immediately. Noting, as HEMI said, that you actually may cross over different SAR zones, the Noumea French zone and also the New Zealand zone as well. Man overboard, of course, good VHF. Communicate early broadcast, life-saving device, and deal with these circumstances. And of course, we're ready to help. And of course, we had a significant experience with that during the Sydney Hobart yacht race, which never is an exemplar, but it probably was as close as it gets in terms of actually a good crew, a good system that backed them up for a very positive result in terms of recovering a man in very difficult circumstances. Sea life, lots of whales, dolphins, sunfish. We ask that you report any incidents with sea life, next available opportunity. And also, please ensure that you've considered your plans for dealing with and reporting medical emergencies and be aware of any pre-existing medical issues for crew members that you're taking into consideration. Just with your delivery home plan, make sure you have one, which we are aware you do, and inform me next to Kim. Just with the long passage, remind you, if an AMSA alluded to it, if you are in a significantly dangerous situation where you need to abandon ship or whatever it may be, the most likely rescue, as probably Hemi would agree, is you may get an aircraft there. It's probably a container ship, or potentially or otherwise. So just think how that's quite different from how you may actually be assisted during, say, a Gold Coast race or a Hobart race. Communications, general contact list we shared with you, as I've mentioned. And those contact numbers are all there. Note your position reports are to be completed in AEST times. In other words, Sydney time at 0635 and at 1835, because you will be changing time zones. But of course, you may choose just to stay in AEST or Australian Eastern Standard Time throughout to make sure that's consistent. As I mentioned, Tara, sailing manager, and Ashley Dart from media will be in Noumea from Sunday. But the remainder of us as race committee and other authorities will be here in Sydney. Tara is going to set up a WhatsApp group with all competitors, and on that, weather and position and report data will be provided. And also, please contact Tara, who's listening in here, directly if you have any concerns or issues with this. And then there will be a WhatsApp group for media, and contact will also be set up. Customs and, of course, quarantine as part of that. Arrival in Noumea is organised by the CNC. Should you finish overnight, you are able to leave your vessel to go to your hotel, but must return first thing in the morning. Thank you for submitting all your arrival documentation promptly to Laura from the CNC. So obviously our finishing partner in Noumea. And customs on return to Australia. You are accountable for that. We are generally interested, but the accountability for customs and quarantine is yours. So ensure your return trip and entry to New South Wales, Queensland, or where you intend to re-enter Australian waters is organised well prior to your arrival with the Australian Border Force and appropriate custom clearance, and other government agencies such as ACLIS. General notices, I think we've got the appropriate paperwork for now. A couple of issues we're still just finalising over the next 36 hours, but I just remind you that the race is on. I'm certainly satisfied as chair. My advice to the Commodore, while it's a long, challenging race, we are well prepared, but I remind you that, even the most benign conditions, sailing does have an element of danger. And you as the personal responsible, as the skipper and as crew and supporters, you must very carefully consider all the contingencies over the next 5 to 7 to 10 days, and we'll of course support you throughout that period. I think I'll leave it there and return to you, Commodore Sam.
Thank you, Lee. Again, open for questions. If there are any, please put them through, which we have none at this stage. So yeah, thanks, Lee. That's thorough, and I appreciate the briefing there. There's nothing further on the agenda for the race briefing. So with that, I'll close. Good luck to all the boats and crews sailing, and have a great race and enjoy the conditions. Thank you. Do you want to write that in?
Oh, you can say it.
We've got a question there from Ty. Border Force Saturday, 8 a.m. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to just check if there's any others? Okay, there are no other further questions, so we'll close the meeting. Thank you. There was another.